Welcome to the Ontario Trillium Foundation's Collective Impact Granting Stream webinar. In this webinar, we'll talk about collective impact in the first 12 months. Thank you so much for joining us today. Paul Bourne is the president and co-founder of Tamarack, an institute for community engagement, which since 2001 has provided leadership in Canada on issues of citizen engagement, collaborative leadership, and community innovation. Prior to Tamarack, Paul was the executive director and co-founder of the Community Opportunities Development Association, one of Canada's leading community economic development associations that was recognized by the United Nations as one of the top 40 projects in the world. Paul was elected into the world's largest network of social innovators as a senior Ashoka Fellow in 2013. He holds a master's degree in leadership and is considered a global leader in helping organizations and communities to develop innovative ideas that motivate people to collaborative action. An author of 4 books, Paul is a motivational speaker who loves the power of stories. I'll now turn things over to Paul.
Thanks, Stephanie, and welcome to all of you. It's fantastic to be on this call today and to talk about collective impact with you. I just want to really take hats off to everyone that's been involved, everyone at the Ontario Trillium Foundation for your amazing leadership. Welcome to the call, Tracy. Tracy Robertson will be joining us a bit later on. And just to the whole team there and the Tamarack team that's been working with you. It's an important time for us, and collective impact is one of those times where we really one of these really important tools for us and ways of thinking that help us to sort of think about how we can do more in our communities and make the work that we're doing more effective. I often say that, you know, collective impact as something that we love to do, and maybe we can just move on to the next slide, Stephanie. And here's the definition. And you know, so often we think about collective impact as this new great idea. And you know, when it came out, I felt that way too. Matter of fact, I still do. But I don't see collective impact as something that is new. I actually see it as an evolved state of collaboration. Matter of fact, at this point, it is the most evolved understanding of large-scale collaboration at the community level that we know. Is something else going to come to trump it? No, it never does. What will come is something that will build on it. And what we're already seeing is this rich collection of ideas that is coming forward, and they're challenging the ideas in collective impact, but not challenging them to say, oh, this is wrong, but challenging them in the sense that people are growing the idea. Like, for instance, we believe that you can't do collective impact without being really good at community engagement. And so all the thinking and work of community engagement that we've come to know and that many of us are very good at, we need to bring that in. You know, we can't do collective impact if we don't think about collaborative leadership. Because the way that we lead is really important in doing collective impact and working across our communities. We need to talk about community innovation and social innovation. Because if we keep working the way we've always worked, but we now do it in a collective impact way, well, we're not going to get better solutions to the issues we're facing by doing more of what we're doing, even if we're doing it in a collective impact approach. So I'm just saying that as much as you're coming here to learn about collective impact, don't forget everything else you know. All of what you know, you bring to this work, and it's that rich understanding of working together toward an impact. It's collaboration to get an impact, to get an outcome. And with collective impact, you know, we know that we have these 4 key conditions, and I'll get there in a moment. Next slide, Stephanie. So one of the things that we understand is that Collective impact is not collaboration as usual. It's not just a single sector approach. It takes the entire community. And it's not just about a focus on individual programs and focus on single focused solutions or short-term impacts that those have. This is about long-term change, and it's about a comprehensive understanding of that which we're doing. Next slide. What we also know is that when we're doing collective impact, we need to be clear on these conditions. I've got 3 here, and most recently someone's talked to me about a 4th one, which is about the history of collaboration in a community. And so it's really about saying, how do we collaborate already? And how do people in our sector collaborate already? Let's go to the next slide. We've all seen these 5 conditions, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, but just knowing that when you get these slides, this will be there with you. Next slide. Okay, let's talk about the first 12 months. I'll tell you my own personal story. I spent a lot of years developing an organization called the Community Opportunities Development Association. We had about 85 staff. I built it from 2 staff up, and we were one of Canada's largest and most successful community economic development organizations. We had started over 1,000 small businesses. We had, most of these people were low income before they came to us. We helped thousands and thousands of people get back to work, and we had an amazing number of children's programs. But what we came to realize is that things were not getting better in our community. We were helping a lot of people, and we were making the lives of those individuals better, but poverty statistics were not changing. People were still low income. Matter of fact, in the 10 years that I was there, the macro statistics, not only in my own community, but in the entire country, meant that we had 5% more people living in poverty than when we started. So the question was, for me, how do we take this work to a new level? How do we begin to change the way that our community is addressing this issue? And what would it actually look like if we could create the lowest level of poverty in Canada? And that became the conversation. It became the conversation and the action of our community for almost 5 years. Now, it was not a discussion that was foreign to us, because we were already at that time the 2nd lowest level of poverty in Canada. But it meant that we wanted to move 2,000 families out of poverty. And what would that take? And that, for me, was the early day thinking. Long before we started writing about collective impact, we were talking about communities collaborating and looking for the kind of change that they were hoping to bring about. Now, if you're like me, we are highly dedicated people, and we care deeply about our communities. And so when we keep working year after year after year, and yes, we're helping individuals, but at the end of the day, things aren't getting better. You know, I hear sometimes that it's kind of a cheesy saying, you know, about that person that's walking along the beach and sees 1,000 seashells. I think they're, what do you call them? They're kind of like a diamond, but and you throw one in to the ocean, and someone says, so what are you doing, right? Like, what does it help to just throw one back in? And you say, well, I'm doing my part, at least for that one animal. I'm saving its life. And somehow what that's saying to us is that, hey, you can only do what you can do. But what if that ocean is polluted? So I'm throwing that animal in, and it's just getting sicker. And maybe the reason all these animals are on the shore is because things are not good in the ocean. I share that because as we work at community change, we get tired of just doing the right thing over and over again and just helping people to live a little bit better. What we really need to do is come to understand not only how to help people living in poverty, but we need to work in a way that there is less poverty. And as we're fond of saying in the work that we do here at Tamarack in Vibrant Communities, we want less poor, not better poor. The question is, how do you begin to do that? In collective impact, we know the basic understanding and theory. I want to talk to you, and if we can go to the next slide, I want to talk to you about these early days. The early days of a collective impact approach when you're just starting to say as a community, we want to do more. We believe that a collective impact approach gives us the tools to do more. It gives us a thinking system to do more. That's where we're talking about. Next slide. And in many ways, what we're wanting to do now is we're wanting to create what we call systems change. We want to change the way that we want there to be less poverty. We want the ocean to be healthier. We want the ecosystem to be thriving. Because when we have the conditions where people are living in good places with great opportunity, healthy, their ability to help themselves increases dramatically. So much of the work of collective impact is moving our community, or as I call here the system, from incremental change thinking to transformational change thinking, meaning that we want to change the very condition of the issues that relate to poverty, that the issues that relate to homelessness, the issues that relate to racism, the issues that are holding people back from thriving. We want to move toward catalyzing our collective leadership. Now, that's just as simple as saying we got to bring everybody together. And we got to start thinking about how are we going to make a difference, rather than just thinking about how is each of our individual programs making a difference. It sounds basic, but it's not, because we all think about what we need to do. And when we come together, now we're starting to think about what is it that leadership would look like if we're all working together. And so then our work in our community is to work with our community leaders, or as I call them here, system leaders, to just understand what it's like to work in this macro level, to think about the whole community and all the circumstances that are creating, let's say, for instance, poverty. We want to be able to actually get people to talk about that in a deeper way. I love innovation labs because at their very core, they're about talking in a deep way and trying to really challenge what's going on. And then trying to understand, now, how do we start to work differently at this issue? Now, this whole process is so critical. And then we want to shift from our collective focus from reacting to all the things that are going on, right? Which is just saying, okay, what's the problem now? We want to start to change our thinking as a community to what's possible now. Let's go to the next slide. And that leads us to this shift in perspective. And I can't emphasize how important these 5 are. So the first one is just really about saying, you know, we're not here to talk about what's going wrong. We're not here just to talk about who's not getting services right. We're not here just to plug the holes in the dam. But we're actually now wanting to change our perspective to say, who in our community cares now about reducing poverty? Who in our community cares about restoring the environment? Who in our community cares about ending homelessness? And we start to look for all of those people who care. Either it's because they're paid to care or because they're individuals who do care, or people living in that circumstance that want to get out. And every one of those organizations and every one of those people has something to contribute to a better community. We then want to really begin to learn to trust one another. Because if we aren't working well together, if we aren't trusting one another, if we can't let go of our own sort of drive and mentality around this, if we can't start to say that the collective approach is the way forward, it's going to be a very long and hard battle, and the collaboration can never happen. We need to start to really understand the issue, so then all of this data that's almost inaccessible needs to become accessible again. And we need to then start to ask, now, what's the collective energy of this group? And what do we want to do together? And where is our energy in moving all this forward? And of course, finding blind spots that are just so critical in sort of keeping us from seeing what's real. I remember working in Headwaters, Orangeville, for a while with a group there, and you know, they had done this amazing process of bringing 100 people together and then developing a great community engagement strategy and then a great community plan. And I remember when the plan came out, their most important first step in building a wellness community, a better, healthier community, was to build community trails amongst I think there were 11 townships in that community. And I remember seeing that and saying to myself, what? Like, after all this transformational work, what it comes down to for you is to building these trails. Now, that was a big mistake on my part, because when they pushed back, they said, look, we've had a lot of conversations, and our first and foremost job is to give something to create something so that every community has something to do. And they want to do something physical, and we got to figure out a project that will get hundreds, if not thousands, of volunteers working together, and that we have a sense of regional pride, that the Headwaters communities in action is what they called themselves, would become real. I thought that was just so interesting, how they put these 5 perspectives into practice. Next slide. So let's go here. You've all been on the collective impact calls. You all are pretty up to date on some of the latest thinking around collective impact. And so what ends up happening is it's now time for you to go back to your board of directors or to your executive director, and they asked me, okay, I get that you want to do this collective impact project, but what does that really mean? Like, if you put a work plan together, what does that really mean? And you could go back and you could do all the things that I just talked about. You could talk about, okay, you know, we need to get people to work together in a real way. We have to sort of think systems change. We have to have these shifts in perspective. And you and me know quite well that at the end of the day, what they're really looking for is, okay, but what are the deliverables? What are the deliverables that you're going to create when you are finished a year from now? So I gave it a lot of thought, and I looked at all the projects that I've ever worked on and many of the projects that Tamarack's worked on, and here are the 6 that I came up with. So I would say to my executive director or my board chair, the first thing that we want to do in these 12 months is that we need to bring our whole community together. And we're going to want that. Let's say if we're working on poverty, we want our community to want to end poverty or to significantly reduce it. We want to build the will to shift away from thinking about making better poor toward the will to make less poor. And the way that we're going to do this is that we're going to create an engagement strategy, and we're going to identify stakeholders from at least these 4 areas. We're going to look at people in government, and we're going to ask, who are the people that care and that would like this change, and we need to bring them into this vision. We need to do the same with business leaders. Obviously, we need to work with the nonprofit sector and the voluntary sector and look at all of those organizations that are already working in the issue. And then we need to start talking as well to the general public, people with lived experience of poverty and people who care about people who are living in poverty. And that engagement strategy looks at how do we bring all of those different players into this issue. Most often it means that we go and hold a lot of community conversations. Most often it means that we run learning events, public events, and we're exploring together. And the way that we're building community will is that we're actually trying to understand the issue much more deeply. One of my favorite things to say to a community is get lost for a year. You know, because we have so many assumptions about what the work will take. And when we're engaging together and dialoguing together, it brings a lot of change forward. The second thing that's really important is that we want to put together some quick win projects. So the way that we're going to do this is that we're going to actually identify some of the things that are going to make a difference. For instance, in Des Moines, Iowa, I remember working with a group there that was putting together was building their community will, but one of the things that they found was that there was about 3,500 people on the waiting list for affordable housing. And so what they did is they said, let's put a working group together that will see if we can reduce that by 10% within 6 months without building any more affordable housing. So can we sort of look at who are the people who are least at need for affordable housing, and can we use market principles to get them a better place to live? And they did it, you know. So it's like putting together a lot of quick win projects as well. And I love to call these projects that only are a small group of people that are from the 4 sectors that we just mentioned, and they're working on a very tangible issue like providing housing for 350 people, and they have 6 months to do it. And you start looking at these different issues and you try to get people to approach them differently. The third thing we're going to do, I say to my board chair, is that we're going to draft a community plan, but we're not going to do that until the end of 12 months. So as we're building community will, as we're looking at all of the key data that we have available to us on the issue, as we have these many, many conversations and this extremely important exploration, the end product is going to be a community plan. And really, this is where we are able to state what the common agenda is and what the shared measurement agreement that we have going forward. We're also going to formalize the network. So in other words, we're not just going to develop a community plan. We're actually going to say, through all of this community engagement work, which partners are going to sign on to the plan. So if you're actually going to have a plan, if you call it a community plan, it can't just be a small group of people that approve it. Again, in Des Moines, Iowa, 172 groups signed on to the plan. That, to me, is the most important and critical component to this work, that you do all of this engagement work. The quick win projects are really there to kind of learn how we work together, and they're just really another form of engagement. But when we want to have a common agenda and shared measurement approach, this community plan is our commitment to that. Henry Mintzberger says in his paper, The Rise and Fall of Strategic Planning, that in strategic planning, we've gotten so obsessed with writing the strategic plan that we forgot that really what we were trying to do is get everybody who is working on putting the strategic plan together to agree on what they want to do together into the future. And then let's write that down. So for me, the common agenda and shared measurement, they aren't just technical processes. They really are an outcome of widespread engagement that allows people to truly come to agreement. And then the plan is the writing down of that agreement. And the shared measurement is our common understanding of the issue from a numbers perspective, and then looking at what are those measures that we're going to track together in order for us to know if we are being successful. They motivate us, they drive us. So the formalizing of the network is to say that once the community plan is adopted, we're hoping that when this plan is presented back to the community, we're going to get 100 or more organizations to sign on. We're going to get everyone who cares to sign on and commit to implementing the plan. Fifth, we need to agree on a governance model. Now, of course, you've all learned about this in collective impact as the backbone role. And it is the backbone role, but it's more than the backbone organization that has the staff that helps implement it. Again, if we think that way, we're not going to move very far. Think about the backbone role as the governance model. Think about it as your leadership roundtable. Think about it as the staff team that's going to support the collaborative. Think about it as all of your members who are signing on to the plan. Think about it as the broader community, and then think about it as your individual projects and your work teams with each of those projects. If you kind of lay that out, that sort of becomes the governance model. It's the management of it, and in many ways, it's how are we going to create the governance structure to implement our common agenda and shared measurement, our community plan. This is so critical in that first 12 to 18 months as we develop that plan and we position ourselves in this way. Lastly, we need to raise funds. My board chair would smile at this point because he said, you know, we can't develop these big projects if we're not raising funds. And what we say there is that so much of this work is about engaging people early on. And if there is one thing that you can take away from this webinar that is true and tried for me, is that I engage funders early. So when we're building community will, we've already identified all the potential funders for this work going forward. Whether it's government, whether it's foundations, whether it's business leaders. And we've made really sure that they have been active and well engaged in the drafting of the community plan. Now, the ask for funding is far different than if you write the plan and then go and try to sell it. See where I'm going with that? If you write the plan and then you're going to just go sell it, now it's just basic fundraising and you're having to sell it to people. But if you involve them early in building community will and building their engagement, then funding is often quite easy. And to be honest with you, I've never worked with a group who's done this right, who engaged funders around the building community will part, and who engaged them in the drafting of their community plan, that have had any issues raising the money they need. And most likely, if you're struggling to find the funding for your collective impact, you have not done the proper job of engaging. Doesn't mean that you still can't, but that's the work, really, of fund development. It's not about asking for money and hoping that you win. It is about engaging people and bringing them into the work. I just really want to open it up to any questions. And you know that on the software here, on GoToWebinar, you can put your questions right in, and Stephanie is monitoring this, and will forward them to me, or I'll actually get to see them here. And really looking forward to hearing them as I continue to add in and sort of take us a little bit deeper. So if you have any questions, please just send them now. And in the meantime, I'm going to keep working through some more of these slides. Stephanie, you want to take us to the next slide? So here I've developed, maybe if you could go slowly, click the next 6 slides. You'll see the numbers on top, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. No, a bit slower than that. Yeah. Okay, keep going. Keep going. Okay, now let's go backwards again. What I've done is I've taken 6 core issues that just help us look at the different stages of this work or some of the key issues that we need to be addressing. So first of all, so much of this work is building trust. And so people say, well, how do we actually get started if we're doing this collective impact? And I always say, find a small group of people that care about this issue and whom you trust, and bring them together. And then ask the question, what's the change we want to see? And then begin, so let's say again, I'm going to just use poverty because we've been using it today. You want to start to map the system and identify the people you want to engage. That's how I always start. So I start to look at, okay, who do we know? If you've read my book, Community Conversations, you'll know that there's a chapter in there called the Top 100. And essentially what we do at this point is we say, who are the 100 people that if they all agreed, we know change would occur. It's just an exercise, but we start to look at it. And then I put up 4 sheets of paper, government, business, voluntary sector, people with lived experience. And then I get the group just to brainstorm in those 4 sectors who they think cares about this issue, and that if they agreed on what needed to be done, something would change. And so we just start brainstorming those names one after the other. And of course, you've always got the powerful people that come up first. But after you get to about 30 or 40 or even 50 names, we start running out of powerful people to be putting up there. And now we start looking for others. And we start looking for people who are living in poverty, and we start looking for some of the agencies. So I was working with the Maine Cancer Foundation, and one of the groups that they thought would be really interested in reducing incidence of cancer, or at least helping us identify it, is to work with the people who drill wells or dig them. Because we realize that there are certain kinds of chemicals in well water in the Maine area that could adversely affect the people's health. And there's still a lot of debate about whether it's a risk of cancer, but the reality is we start looking for these unusual suspects because we know people who care about the issue that do that kind of work. That's what we mean kind of by mapping the system. And then we start to invite people in. And so this is the early stage. It's even before we do our full out system. We start then bringing in small groups of government leaders, small groups of business leaders, small groups of voluntary sector leaders, small groups of people with lived experience. We try always to make those meetings mixed, so all 4 sectors represented at the meetings, and we talk. And we invite people to share their ideas, and we continually ask people who needs to be involved. That, to me, is a critical component, because if we move too quickly to answers, if we move too quickly to solutions, if we move too quickly to running programs, if we move too quickly to needing money, if we move too quickly to organizing ourselves, incorporating, that kind of thing, we don't take the time. And many of you work of Margaret Wheatley, and she talks about the power of emergence, that point in our development process where we're allowing creativity to emerge, where we're allowing questions to emerge, and that creates an amazing energy. And I know for so many of us that are caught up in day-to-day work and in strategic planning, we find ourselves so caught up in doing that we don't value that space where creativity lives. And that's that emergent phase. Again, send me any of your questions as we're going through here. But in the meantime, I'm going to keep going. Next slide. This is what I've just been talking about in terms of this emergent phase. And this is just a slide to help us look at that differently. Next slide.
Paul, we do already have a couple questions. Do you want me to save them for later, or do you want to go through them now?
Yeah, let's go through them, and then I'll go through some of these early. I've already talked about a lot of this, and I'm going through some more detail. But throw out some questions. I'd love to hear them, Stephanie.
Yeah, so we have one here from Chris Bone. How do you ensure that a quick win focus doesn't eclipse the intent of collective impact, large-scale, transformative, and systematic change over time?
Great question. And that was from Chris?
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Chris, for that one. You know, I sometimes don't even teach the quick win because in the early days, we get somewhat confused. Because, you know, I think that this building trust phase and this emergent phase is so important that we shouldn't have quick wins at that level. But, you know, once we have actually, the way I normally do this work is I spend the first 3 to 6 months working with teams to help them identify who all needs to be involved, and then we do some base engagement work. But then what we eventually do is we create we host a large community meeting, often with up to 100 people in it, and we spend a day and a half just really exploring the issue and trying to have early on thinking about what needs to be done. And it's only after we get that far that then we create our leadership roundtable. We often then create what we call a listening team that is going to go out and do more listening with the community. And we create a data team that looks at all of the information and tries to sort of come up with a shared measurement suggestions and started to provide the data that we need for our conversations. And then we create action teams at that point because people want to get doing some stuff. So your instinct is just right on, Chris, that you don't want it to interrupt. So I try to do that within 3 to 6 months of us coming together and working together. I allow that emergent phase to be our first phase, and then we move to what we call this transformation or catalytic phase, where we run this big community event that brings everyone together, and that kind of launches our major community engagement strategy. Hope that's helpful.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Paul. We have one other one that we could get to right now, and this one comes from James, and he says, you mentioned that engaging funders at the outset is really important to ensure sustainable funding in the future. How do you deal with the power imbalance this could create? For example, bending the work of the project to ensure we receive funding. Do you have any tips on laying good groundwork so funders are a part of the conversation and not directing it?
Who was that again, Stephanie?
So this was from James.
Hey, James. Thanks for that. Hey, you know, I have a whole bunch of questions for you now, and I wish this was going back and forth. You know, funders are evolving fairly quickly, and they're coming to understand that they're not just going to fund things, that they want to be engaged as well, and they want to see who's engaged, and they want to try and understand how the collaboration is really effective. So often they're willing to be involved. And if we've created the proper format where we have, we might have business leaders and government leaders and funders and people with lived experience in the room. And we start talking much more as individuals rather than as people that are people of power. Funders are people with power. And my trick in this is that I always want the conversations to be multi-sector, and I definitely want up to a quarter of the people in the room to be people of lived experience. So I work really hard at that, of bringing people with lived experience of poverty, let's say, into the discussion. Because now it's much more difficult for people to sort of become philosophical. The other thing is that we're not writing the community plan for the first 12 months. So we actually don't have a lot of things to influence. At this point, we're listening and learning. So really, once we get to the point of writing the plan, the funder may have insights, but if you've truly engaged them, they've been listening to everybody else's insights. Now, they may have their needs and say, hey, these needs to be met, otherwise I can't fund you. But that's fair, right? But you have a relationship with them now, and you can have a discussion about that. And it's markedly different than sort of doing an RFP and writing to an unknown entity. Hope that helps.
Perfect. Thanks, Paul. You can probably keep going with yours right now and with your presentation, and I'll throw you one more question at the end. Great.
So keep asking, keep thinking as we're unfolding here. People often talk about what's the role of the backbone organization. Matter of fact, what I get most often in collective impact work is a group coming to me and saying, we're the backbone organization for this new idea we have in our community. And my eyes always rise up, and what I'm thinking, and sometimes I actually say it out loud, really? And most often when a group says to me, we are the backbone organization, I know that they haven't done their homework, meaning that they haven't done true engagement work, that they haven't built a strong coalition, that they don't have a plan in place that a lot of groups have connected with. You're not the backbone organization. You lead in the backbone role. So it's a much bigger emphasis here. And so what we come to understand is that we have to build the backbone structure for a project to be successful. And that's what we're talking about here, is that a group can come and say, we are acting as the backbone organizing group through the development phase of this project, or we are fulfilling the backbone function for this work, but we're in the early days. Then I know that this person understands what we're trying to do. But just to give you a sense that in these early days, the backbone role often will be a steering team. And I like my steering teams, again, to be made up of the 4 sectors: government, business, voluntary, and people with lived experience. You've got to bring people in. If you're fighting poverty, you've got to bring people living in poverty into the leadership structure. You'll often have a staff person. Sometimes they're consultants early on because there's a lot of work that has to be done. And the volunteers that are part of that leadership roundtable, they don't have the time, in addition to their own jobs, to be organizing all of these events. So we need some staff support to make that happen. And what we need, probably most importantly, and sometimes we mistake this organization as the backbone organization, is we need a fiscal sponsor, a strong organization with charitable status. Because as we receive gifts, either from government or from donors, we need an organization to absorb those. And then we need, if we have staff, someone's got to pay the bills for all the work that we're doing. So that all together, that richness, is the early on backbone role. Next slide. the thing that I can't emphasize enough is that in this first year, developing a database that has all the names of the people that have been engaged. So you would never run an engagement session that doesn't get the people's names and what they're interested in and what they're committed to. And when I say it's actually worth $1 million, what I have found in our work is that when you can come to a donor or a funder and you can say, we have talked to 1,000 people in the last 12 months, and here they are, and here's a summary of them, and we've built a database. And of these 1,000 people, we already have 200 organizations that are saying they're interested in working together with us on this, or 50 organizations, however it is. But then when you're also developing your community, that's what I mean, it's worth $1 million, because you have what your most important thing that you're bringing to funders is that you have community consensus. And that's really something they don't get very often. And so if you can show this broad-based engagement with these people that are committed to moving this forward and committed to your plan, community consensus is really one of the key things that donors like to see today, that there is that agreement. But the other reason to keep a database and to communicate your idea is that you've got to keep communicating. So all year long, you're sending out communication pieces and you're working through social media and newsletters and data sheets, whatever it is, so that you're engaging these people and educating everybody. So it's not just having a one-time engagement process. You've got to figure out a way to keep people engaged. Next slide. And this is, I had talked about building an engagement strategy early on, and this just gives you kind of an early process for how to do that. And we have lots of tools for building engagement strategies, and Tamarack also runs a 3-day course on building engagement strategies. So a lot more to be said about this, but this gives you a bit of an outline, and I think slide 6 gives you an outline for a community plan. And so that's really at the core of my presentation. And there is more to say. We're coming to the end of our time here. I'm not sure if we have any more questions, Stephanie, or if you're just ready to wrap up.
Yeah, I could throw you one more quick question and then we'll wrap things up. We had one more here from Tricia, and she just asked if you can say a little more about what you meant by inclusive data.
Oh, thanks, Tricia. Yeah, what I mean by inclusive data is data that is easily understood by everyone and that is comprehensive in its understanding. So what we often will do in the first 12 months is that we go out and we put together a data team. And what I asked this data team to do is to gather all the information that people are using to make decisions around the issue. So if we're looking at child well-being, what I do is I ask them to go out and find all the data and ask all of their partners, what data do you use to make decisions? And they gather that all into one place and they have a discussion about it. The second question we ask all of our stakeholders, what data do you need that you're not getting? That's our second question that we ask. And then we put all of that together, and then we start to present data. The work of the data team is to present data to the community through the engagement team, which is the listening team, in a way that everyone can understand it, that it's accessible to everyone, so that we can have a good discussion about the data. That's what I mean by inclusive data. It's broader than that, but that's the simple understanding. I hope that helps. Thanks for that great question.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Paul, and thanks for sharing your insights and perspectives with us, and thank you all for your questions as they came in. I'm just going to pass things over to Tracy from the Ontario Trillium Foundation just to tell us a little more about the granting stream.
Okay, hi there. Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you have a bit of an echo there, Tracy.
Okay, let me do this. How's that?
Still echoing.
Okay. All right. Just a sec. Okay, how's that?
There's
Be better.
still a tiny bit of an echo.
Okay.
A little better.
Feel better?
Yeah, it just sounds like there's two of you, but I think it's manageable.
Is there any suggestion you have? I've got the audio off.
Are you maybe on your computer and the phone at the same time?
Yes. There, how's that?
Okay.
That's better, isn't it?
Yeah, there we go.
Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. I only know we have a few minutes.
I have to love real-time technical difficulties.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks so much, and I just want to thank the whole team, Paul and the team at Tamarack, working with us at the Ontario Trillium Foundation. We really appreciate your expertise and your support in this important work. Just want to emphasize who we are. If you're not familiar with us, we do have a mission of building healthy and vibrant communities. And we strengthen the capacity of the voluntary sector through investments in community-based initiatives. Our foundation itself has had quite a bit of impact over the last year even. We've been investing in 1,000 organizations, and we are one of we are Canada's largest granting foundation. So in the work that we're doing over the next decade, we know we'll invest $1 billion in Ontario. And in one area that we're interested in is, and in one of our investment initiatives, is collective impact. Our work and our investment strategy is aligned with the Canadian Index of Wellbeing, and we have 6 action areas within that, where they are all leading into building a healthy and vibrant community. So that's important to us. There's several grant programs that are on our website, but the collective impact is one that's kind of unique. We do if I could move the slide, that'd be great. If you could move the slide, I don't think I can move it.
To this one or
there? Yeah, perfect. So our collective impact granting stream is focused on bringing fundamental change. We have grants that support collective strategy and transform action to tackle complex community issues, so that's our focus. On our website, we have 3 different areas of stages that we invest in. There's define the impact, organization for impact, and deliver impact. And just as Paul was talking today around the 12, even the steps of the first year, we really align that with defining the impact, and you'll see that on our website. So all our information is on our website at otf.ca, and you can contact our support center for any information you want, or you can email nalo@otf.ca, which is on your sheet there. We also are open to having any program manager that you're aware of in the community as a link, and you can call any strategy lead that can also talk with you and work with you on the Collective Impact Initiative. And I'll leave it at that.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Tracy. I'm just going to wrap up by telling you guys a little bit about our upcoming events. We have some one-days, multi-days, and one more webinar in the near future. So the one-day Upside Down Thinking happening on September 12th, if anyone is out near Red Deer, Alberta. Accelerating Community Change with Collective Impact, September 15th, and again in Winnipeg. And then most notable, our upcoming Community Change Institute, which is taking place in Toronto, September 26th to 30th. So registration is still open, and feel free to reach out to myself, Stephanie, at tamarack.ca, if anyone's interested in registering for that or just learning a little bit more about the program itself. And we also have the Evaluating Community Impact rounding out our multi-day events for this year, which is in Hamilton, Ontario, November 15th to 17th. And finally, we have one more upcoming webinar for Collective Impact 3.0 with Liz Weaver and Mark Cabage happening on September 12th at noon. So you're welcome to sign up for any of those events or webinars through our website. So thank you so much for joining us. And again, all of this has been recorded, and we will be sure to circulate the slide deck resources as well as the recording for you guys at some point next week. So keep an eye out for that. And again, feel free to share it with your networks. So thank you everyone for joining us, and have a great day.